Hello, this is Judy, and for the next hour, I will be reading from the February 23rd, 2026 issue of the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. I will do my best to pronounce all names and words correctly, yet please forgive me if I do not. And our first article it's under Americas, and the title is What to Know About the Killing of the Powerful Cartel Leader El Mencho in Mexico. The killing could give the government a leg up in its dealings with the U.S. Trump administration. And there's a picture, there's a graphic with a slide and words on it, and the caption states that Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum looks at a slide with the information about Jalisco, Jalisco, new generation cartel leader Nemesio Orsagurea, and that's Nemesio Osegurea, known as El Mencho, during her daily morning news conference at the National Palace in Mexico City, Monday, February 23, 2026, the day after the Mexican army killed the cartel leader. And this is an AP photo taken by Jeanette Riquelme, and that's Riquelme. And this article is written by Maria Verza, Verza, of the Associated Press. Mexico City. The Mexican army killed the country's most powerful cartel leader and one of the United States' most wanted fugitives, notching a major victory while cartel members responded with a wave of violence across the country. The killing Sunday of Jalisco new generation cartel leader Nemesio Orsagurea Cervantes during an attempt to capture him in Jalisco state was the highest profile blow against cartel since the recapture of former Sinaloa, and that's Sinaloa cartel boss Joaquin El Chapo Guzman a decade ago. Following Orsagurea Cervantes' death, security forces were placed on alert throughout the country as gunmen unleashed violence. Cars torched by cartel members blocked roads in 20 Mexican states. People locked themselves in their homes in Guadalajara, Mexico's second largest city and Jalisco's capital, and schools canceled Monday in several states. The killing could give the government a leg up in its dealings with the Trump administration, which has been threatening tariffs or unilateral military action if Mexico does not show results in the fight against the cartels. But the long-term effect on Mexico's security landscape remains unclear. Here's what to know. El Mencho was the leader of a fast-growing criminal group. Orsagurea Cervantes, better known as El Mencho, was 59 years old and originally from the western state of Michoacan, and that's Michoacan. His ties to organized crime went back at least 3 decades. In 1994, he was tried for trafficking heroin in the U.S. and sent to prison for 3 years. Upon returning to Mexico, he quickly rose through Mexico's drug trafficking underworld. Around 2009, he founded the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, which became Mexico's fastest growing criminal organization, moving cocaine, methamphetamines, fentanyl, and migrants to the United States, and using violence with the use of drones and improvised explosive devices. The cartel earned a reputation for brazen attacks on Mexican security forces, including downing a military helicopter in Jalisco in 2015 and attempting a spectacular but unsuccessful assassination of Mexico City Police Chief Omar Garcia Harfuch, Harfuch, who is now Mexico's Federal Security Secretary. It recruited aggressively, experimenting with new ways to reach potential members online, and generated revenue through fuel theft, extortion, and timeshare fraud, among other activities. Ursurgia Cervantes died in a battle with troops sent to capture him. Ursurgia Cervantes was killed during an attempt to capture him as his followers attempted to fight off Mexican troops. Mexico's Defense Secretary Ricardo Trevilla said Monday that the Army and National Guard launched an operation in the southern part of Jalseco state to capture Ursurgia Cervantes, involving the Mexican Air Force and Special Forces. Intelligence gathered about one of Ursurgia Cervantes' romantic partners led them to his hideout, he said. The cartel counterattacked, and in the ensuing confrontation, federal forces killed 8 members of the criminal group. Ursurgia Cervantes and 2 of his bodyguards were wounded and later died during transfer by air to Mexico City, Trevilla said. Rocket launchers capable of shooting down aircraft and destroying armored vehicles were seized at the scene. Mexico is keen to show Trump results in the fight against cartels. Ursurgia Cervantes' death will help Mexico's government show results to the U.S., which is pressuring its neighbor to pursue drug cartels more aggressively. Both countries said intelligence cooperation helped lead to Sunday's operation. Ursurgia Cervantes was facing multiple indictments in the United States, and the U.S. State Department had offered a $15 million reward for information leading to his arrest. The Trump administration designated his cartel and other foreign terrorist organizations a year ago. U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau, who was U.S. Ambassador to Mexico during the first Trump administration, applauded the operation via X, writing, "The good guys are stronger than the bad guys. Congratulations to the forces of law and order in the great Mexican nation." Mike Vigil, former chief of international operations for the DEA, said Mexico had sent, in quotes, a strong message to Donald Trump's administration that they are fighting aggressively and effectively against the most powerful cartels. He added that, in quotes, the majority of the information came from the Mexican armed forces and all credit goes to Mexico. Cartel leader's death leaves a power vacuum. It's not clear who will succeed Ursurgia Cervantes or if any one person can. The Jalisco cartel has had a presence in at least 21 of Mexico's 32 states and is active in almost all of the United States, according to the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration. But it also has a global But it is also a global organization, and the loss of its leader could be felt well beyond Mexico. El Mencho controlled everything. He was like a country's dictator, Vigil said. His absence could slow the cartel's rapid growth and expansion and lead it initially weakened against the Sinaloa cartel on several fronts where they or their proxies are fighting. The Sinaloa is locked in its own internal power struggle, however, between the sons of El Chapo and the faction loyal to Ismael El Mayo Zambada, and that's Zambada, who is in U.S. custody. Vigil said Mexico should seize the moment to launch an effective frontal assault based on intelligence. This is a big opportunity for Mexico and the United States if they work together, he said. Security analyst David Saucedo, and that's Saucedo, said that if relatives of Ursurgia Cervantes take control of the cartel, the violence seen Sunday could continue. If others take power, they could be more willing to turn the page and continue operations. The greatest fear would be that the cartel turns to indiscriminate violence. They could decide to, quotes, launch narco-terrorism attacks and generate a scenario similar to what Colombia lived in the 1990s, on a full-on attack against the government, car bombs, assassination, and attacks on aircraft. And this story is by the Associated Press. Our next article is under the Star in Italy, and it is an opinion article. And the title is, Canada Gave Everything in its Olympic Final and Should Have Won. A golden opportunity ends in heartbreak and regret. And this article is written by Bruce Arthur, a columnist, and Bruce Arthur is a columnist for The Star. Milan. They will see the moments flash in their minds for years. Open nets, open ice, a chance to win gold for their country. In the first best men's Olympic hockey final in 12 years, Canada knew what was riding on this and was the better team and should have won. Instead, it hurt. In quotes, "You guys can be the judge of who the better team was tonight," said Nathan MacKinnon after Canada's 2-1 loss to the United States. "But they won, we lost. It just wasn't meant to be, felt like." That's what it felt like. The U.S. is the perennial underdog and Canada the under-pressure favorite, and Sidney Crosby was out with a knee injury. The Americans scored first when Matt Boldy walked between Cal McCarr and Devin Toews, Toews, like they were stuck elevator doors, and 6 minutes in it was 1-0. The Americans looked fast. At period's end, the shots were 8-on-8. And then this Canadian team played their best game of the tournament, but couldn't score. Connor McDavid ran out of room and was stopped on a breakaway. The U.S. killed 1:33 of a 5-on-3 power play that was, to that point, clicking at 43% at 5-on-4. Canada tied the game with 1:44 left when Bo Horvat won a faceoff and McCarr slid a puck into the space between Connor Hellebuyck's, and that's Hellebuyck pad, and his blocker that wasn't even as wide as a mail slot, 1-on-1. And then came all the regrets. If you had to pick one, it was defenseman Devin Toews, of all people. Mitch Marner found him all alone in the crease, and Toews jammed a puck into Hellebuyck's skate and then chopped again, but Hellebuyck somehow got his goal stick in the way and the puck skidded wide. It was a save that belongs in a museum. Honestly, I haven't even seen it, but if he saved it, that's a great save, said Toews. There were so many. MacKinnon, the Marchand-Wilson-Bennett line, Macklin, Celebrini over and over and over and over. Was Hellebuyck looming in their heads? He's that good. Was it just bad luck? That happens too. But Canada has come through at the highest level so many times. At the end of regulation, the shots were Canada 41, America 26, and had the officials not gawked as the U.S. was caught with 6 or 7 skaters on the ice, it could have been more. And then in 3-on-3 overtime, yeah, it stunk. But as Coach John Cooper said, we knew the rules. The greatest players in the world make mistakes. McDavid tried a hero charge and was stopped. And then he tried again but was poke-checked by Hellebuyck. The puck bounced out and McCarr jumped to pinch at the U.S. line rather than to back it up. He lost that bet. A 50-50 puck sat between MacKinnon and Zach Werenski, Werenski, at the other end, and MacKinnon hesitated. He lost that bet. Neither McDavid nor McCarr picked up Jack Hughes, who was the third American trailing the play. Hughes beat Jordan Binnington at 1:44 of overtime for Olympic gold. Maybe a Matt Schaefer or Connor Bedard makes a difference, but this roster played a fantastic tournament, and the best players in the world had chances. The best hockey team ever to ever be put together there, said Marchand. I don't think we could play better after the Finnish game, and they proved me wrong, said Cooper. I thought it was a flawless performance. There were a couple of chances we created that probably 95% of the time go in and didn't go in tonight. I thought we played a great game, McDavid told TV cameras in an interview where he struggled to find words. I thought their goalie played really, really well. He was asked how he would process this. In quotes, just move on, onward. They will not get over this, maybe ever. McDavid has lost the Stanley Cup final twice, and now the Olympic final too. He was named tournament MVP with an NHL record breaking 13 points. He gave this all he had. Incredible, said Crosby of McDavid. He did everything. He did everything humanly possible to lead us, to come into a tournament like this, the best players in the world, and to be able to elevate to the level that he was at is unheard of. It's something that's amazing to see up close. You know, you feel for him just because he did so much and led in every possible way. And we all want to win for each other, but especially for him. That, of course, is what people said about the 38-year-old Crosby, who came out in pads and a uniform for the medal ceremony and the anthem. It was hard not to notice the salt and pepper in his hair. Crosby was asked if he considered playing through the injury. He was asked if the idea that this was his final Olympics might have weighed in the decision. It might have crossed my mind a bit, said Crosby, but ultimately I think it was about what was best for our group and what gave us the best chance to win. I couldn't go out there, but you saw this game. It was an incredible hockey game. I mean, he's been everything for this country, all of us. Just an inspirational leader, a role model to all of us, said Celebrini. And I mean, we just wanted to get that for him and make him proud. The Americans took a FaceTime call from President Donald Trump in the locker room where FBI Director Kash Patel partied with the players. And while Canada's players didn't touch the underlying politics, that was gut churning. At least the American women's team didn't head down that road. But yeah, everything about this hurt. This Canadian generation waited their entire hockey lives for this game. They knew what was riding on this and the responsibility of the uniform. And Canada should have won, but instead this will reverberate in them and in the country for a long time. That's the thing with waiting, with caring this much, with carrying a nation on your shoulders. You have to live with the results. The next article is under the Canada section, and the title is Ottawa Launching Countrywide Survey and Build Up Towards Formal Men's Health Strategies. The federal government is taking its first steps towards developing a national men's health strategy, launching a survey for Canadians to weigh in. And this article is written by Nick Murray of the Canadian Press. The federal government is taking its first steps towards developing a national men's health strategy, launching a survey for Canadians to weigh in. As previously reported by the Canadian Press, Federal Health Minister Marjorie Michel is working on a strategy on men's and boys' health to be released later this year. The national online survey will launch in early March and will run into the beginning of June. Advocacy group Movember and researchers from the University of British Columbia released a report last summer calling on the federal government to create such a strategy. The group says 75,000 Canadian men died prematurely in 2023, and many of their deaths were from preventable causes. They found a majority of men delayed seeking treatment for symptoms, and less than half felt listened to when they first received health care. Health Canada says it's working with Movember Canada to develop the strategy. Sunday's news is the first time the government has formally acknowledged its work towards launching a national strategy. A news release from Health Canada on the survey says taxpayers would save $12.4 million annually with improved men's health outcomes, with billions more in increased productivity, citing research from the Movember study. To build Canada strong, we need the full participation of everyone in our society. Help us build a strategy that improves health, prevents harm, and strengthens our communities for men, boys, and for everyone in Canada, Michel said in a statement accompanying the news release. Canada stands to be among one of only a few countries to have a men's health strategy, along with South Africa, Malaysia, Brazil, and the UK. The UK strategy report points out that British men live shorter lives than women and are more likely to be diagnosed with cancer, cardiovascular disease, and type 2 diabetes. 3 out of 4 people who died by suicide in the UK in 2024 were men. The British report also states that, in quotes, good health is not a zero-sum game, and improving the health and well-being of men and women are complementary objectives. This report by the Canadian Press was first published February 22, 2026, with files from Sarah Ritchie, Ritchie. This next article is under federal politics, and the title is Canada-Ukraine Foundation calls on feds to match donations as war hits 4-year mark. And it says, under Ottawa, the Canada-Ukraine Foundation has asked Ottawa to match donations to support humanitarian work in the country as the 4th anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion approaches. And this article is written by Alicia Passafiume, and that's Passafiume. In Ottawa, the Canadian-Ukraine Foundation has asked Ottawa to match donations to support humanitarian work in the country as the 4th anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion approaches. Executive Director Valery Kostyuk, and that's Kostyuk, said while his organization has collected more than $100 million for Ukraine, demand for food and water, medical equipment, and power generators continues to grow. The foundation is asking the federal government to match all private donations it receives in 2026. If Ukraine stops fighting back, Ukraine will cease to exist, Kostyuk said. The bottom line is Russia can make that decision to stop the war. More than 1 million people have been killed and millions more displaced in the Russia-Ukraine war since Moscow launched its unprovoked attack on February 24, 2022. Kostyuk said Ukraine's recovery needs to begin before the war ends, and if Canadians support that goal, the federal government should as well. Ottawa has delivered billions of dollars in aid to Ukraine since the war began, including $6.5 billion in military assistance. Despite that, analysts say Canada and its peers are still dragging their heels on supporting Ukraine's defense. It's still too slow, and we are not meeting the need to help Ukraine win this war, said Wendy Gilmore, who oversaw industry collaboration for the Department of National Defense during Russia's initial invasion in 2014, and 9 months after the full-scale invasion, served as NATO Assistant Secretary General overseeing defense investment. What we need to learn from Ukraine is how to adapt under pressure. Canada joined European allies in Paris last month to sign an agreement on future security guarantees for Ukraine. The agreement states that Ukraine's allies will secure the country's land, air, and marine borders if it is presented with a viable ceasefire deal. Last week saw a third round of U.S. brokered negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. Central to the negotiations is the future of Russian control of Ukrainian territory. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said his country will not surrender territory for peace. What we have all witnessed is an ethnocide, a deliberate attempt at extermination on a scale unlike any we have ever seen in the West since World War II, Kostyuk said. This report by the Canadian Press was first published February 23, 2026, and contains files from Nick Murray and Dylan Robertson. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Our next article is under Olympics and Paralympics. Canada's 2026 Olympics medal breakdown. How our nation fared compared to past Winter Games. And this article is written by McKenna Hart, who is a digital designer. For over a century, the Winter Olympics have dared to provide answers to fascinating questions when it comes to sports. How fast can a human being shoot down a tube of ice head first? Who can best combine the activities of skiing and shooting a rifle? But more importantly, they serve as a shining beacon of athletic excellence. This year, Team Canada won 21 medals, 5 gold, 7 silver, and 9 bronze. As the 2026 Milan Cortina Games come to a close, let's dive into the data and take a closer look at our nation's performance. Canada's medal count over the years. Canada has completed in every Winter Olympics and has won at least one medal each time. However, 84% of Canada's 246 medals were won after the 1988 Olympics in Calgary. Canada won 208, and more than half of them, 127, came from the last 5 games. Where Canada won in 2026. This year, the country's 21 medals were earned across 7 sports. About half of them came from speed skating events, which account for more than 1/3 of Team Canada's total medal account. A heated rivalry. There is one sport where Canada has historically reigned supreme: hockey. It's a cornerstone of the Winter Olympics and arguably the most prestigious event in each Games. While both the men and women failed to claim gold this year, Canada is the most decorated team in the Olympic ice hockey history with 25 total medals, including 14 gold. Canada was also the first country to win gold in both men's and women's hockey in a single year, doing so 3 times. Canada has never finished lower than a silver since women's hockey was introduced to the Games in 1998. While the 2026 Winter Olympics may not have been Canada's best for medals, there's always French Alps 2030, à la prochaine. And McKenna Hart is a digital designer at The Star. Her email, you can reach her versus her at her email, which is MHART @thestar.ca. Our next article is a reader's letter, and it's an opinion article. Title is Students Aren't an Expense, Premier Ford, They're an Investment. Ontario lifts tuition freeze, unveils OSAP reforms as it boosts university and college funding. Here's what that will mean for schools and students. February 12th. I am a grade 11 student and a back-to-back winner of the Canada Top Young Scientist Award for Innovation. I want to pursue advanced study in computational sciences so that I can contribute to Canada's leadership position in AI and robotics. Yet I am seeing educational opportunities disappear in this province. The decline in inflation-adjusted funding per student, the abrupt closure of the Ontario Science Centre and its inquiry-based STEM school program, and now changes to OSAP that will make higher education more difficult to manage. Given Canada's low birth rate, young people will make up a smaller proportion of our future workforce. That's why each and every student's potential matters so much. When we underinvest in youth, we weaken Ontario's pipeline of domestic talents, harming our capacity to innovate at home. Supporting students should not be considered an expenditure, but a form of potentially high return investment. And that's Arisha Nath of Ontario, and that's ARUSHIA, Nath, N-A-T-A of Ontario. It seems as if every time Premier Doug Ford displays a tremendous lack of judgment, someone else ends up paying for his mistake. This time because Ford did not allow universities to raise tuition for 7 consecutive years. Schools were compelled to admit more international students who pay much higher tuition than Ontario students just to keep themselves running. The federal government rightly put a cap on the number of foreign students permitted entry to Canadian universities and colleges, but now future domestic students will pay more for tuition than they did previously. Making students pay for the Premier's lack of foresight is par for the course for the Ford government. The people of Ontario need to hold him accountable in the next provincial election. and that was written by Bonnie Bacvar, Bacvar of Toronto. Our next article is under Business and Personal Finance. The title is Tax Filing Season Begins Today. Here's all you need to know. Gather your tax slips and receipts because it's that time of the year. The deadline to file your taxes may feel like it's far away, but experts say that not getting started early is one of the biggest mistakes Canadians make at tax season. Tax forms are shown in Toronto on Thursday, April 5th, 2018. And this is an image. This is taken from the image. And it's the photos by the Canadian Press, Doug Ives, Ives. And this article is by Rikita Dubey, and that's Dubey of the Canadian Press. Gather your tax slips and receipts because it's that time of the year. The 2025 tax filing season officially kicks off on Monday. It will last a little over 9 weeks, ending with the April 30th deadline for most taxpayers. Most employers sent T4 slips by the end of February via mail, email, or employee portals. Financial institutions will also send investment slips, while more sophisticated investment firms send their clients an annual summary of all investments and gains around the same time, said Ryan Minor, Director of Tax at CPA Canada. If you're anticipating owing money to the government, Minor said you may want to do some scenario planning. Additional contributions to your registered retirement savings plan could help lower that amount as long as you have contribution room remaining. Taxpayers have until March 2nd to contribute to their RRSP for the 2025 tax year. H&R Block tax specialist Yannick Lemay said it's important to familiarize yourself with credits and deductions that are available. There are more than 400 credits and deductions that Canadians may be eligible for at tax time, Lemay said. You want to make sure that you have those documents, and for most of those credits and benefits, you do need supporting documents, he said. Minor said there are some commonly missed tax credits, such as the disability tax credit. I've seen quite a few cases where that was filed and they got reassessments going back several years and refunds, he said. He said it's important to look at your own situation and check if there may be a credit you could claim, such as for first-time home buyers or home accessibility, among others. Minor said it's important to set up and check your Canada Revenue Agency account and make sure you haven't missed any slips or documents. If CRA has a record of something that you don't have, then you should probably go and track down that slip, he said. The CRA My Account will also show your status for refunds, credits, and appeals. Taxpayers can also find other information, such as when they get their direct deposit for a tax refund. Even if you won't file your taxes for a few more weeks, it's worth checking that your address and other information are correct in the system while there's time to get it fixed. The CRA is introducing several changes this tax season. One such change is that taxpayers won't have to wait for days to be mailed a code when opening their CRA account and can choose to verify their identity using online tools. Agency spokesperson Charles Drouin, Drouin, said people can use a valid photo government-issued ID, such as a driver's license, as well as their last tax return, provided they filed taxes in the past 2 years. The agency is also encouraging taxpayers to use its new AI-powered chatbot for questions. For self-employed taxpayers, Minor said they need to figure out before April 30th if they owe money, even though the deadline for self-employed taxpayers to file their return is June 15th. Despite the extra time to file their taxes, money owing must still be paid before the end of April to avoid accruing interest. You've got to make sure you do an estimate and pay your taxes even though you get extra time to file, Minor said. Experts say even as tax portal opens, you don't need to rush to file. Miner said sometimes people don't receive all their tax slips, such as those from their trust, until March. How early you file depends upon your confidence that you have everything you need, he said. For example, if it's a simple situation of just a T4 and you're expecting a refund, there's no harm in filing early. And this report by the Canadian Press was first published February 23rd, 2026. This next article is a Star exclusive. Metrolinx and the city spent nearly $100 million on smart track stations that may never be built, documents reveal. Confidential documents, as seen by the Star, show that roughly $97 million has been spent on stops at King Liberty and Finch Kennedy that were indefinitely deferred in 2024. And this article is written by Ben Spur, who is a City Hall bureau chief. Toronto and Metrolinx sank nearly $100 million into a pair of smart track stations that may never be built, the Star has learned. The stops at King Liberty and Finch Kennedy were part of former Mayor John Tory's signature transit plan, but they were indefinitely deferred in December 2024 as ballooning costs forced the once sweeping proposal to be pared back to just 3 stations. A public report that went to the council at the time didn't include the details of how much had already been spent on the ill-fated stations. The plan is being mostly funded by the city, but it's under the control of Metrolinx, the provincial transit agency, which is in charge of building stations and has kept cost figures classified. But a confidential attachment to a report debated by the city's audit committee earlier this month contained the figures. The document, which has not been made public, but a copy of which was viewed by the Star, shows that just under $50 million was spent on each shelf station for a total of about $97 million, according to 2025 estimates. The city was responsible for roughly $43 million of those sunk costs. John Tory's plan whittled down. Tory pitched SmartTrack in his 2014 election campaign as a 22-stop, 53-kilometer transit line that could be built in 7 years without raising property taxes. Once he took office, the proposal was gradually whittled down as a result of technical and funding challenges, and by 2021, it had shrunk to just 5 stations on existing GO transit lines to be paid for in part through tax hikes. In July 2023, with costs mounting and Tory out of office, the city and province capped SmartTrack spending at $1.7 billion. The city agreed to pay $1.5 billion, including a $585 million federal contribution, while Ontario committed up to $226 million. But just 16 months later, in November 2024, the Ontario Minister of Transportation told the city that 5 stops would now exceed the approved budget. The province attributed the surprise overrun to global market conditions, rising interest rates, and inflation, as well as more advanced station design work. Details weren't released at the time, but the new confidential document reveals that the projected price tag for the 5-stop version had grown by more than $840 million, blowing past the approved budget by 50% in a little more than a year. With the available funding no longer enough for all 5 stops, under recommendations from city staff, council voted to move ahead only with stations at East Harbour, Bloor Lansdowne, and St. Clair Old Weston. While council asked the province to find funding to build the deferred stops, Finch Kennedy in Scarborough and King Liberty downtown, no additional money has been made available. According to public city reports, by the time the stops were paused, they had reached 90 to 100% design, and early work such as utility relocation and site preparation had started. SmartTrack called a boondoggle. Councillor Gordon Perks, Parkdale of Hyde Park, said he couldn't comment on figures in a confidential document. But speaking generally, he called SmartTrack one of the biggest boondoggles in the city of Toronto's history. John Tory ran on a platform of giving us free transit and wound up giving away the store so that we lost control of transit planning, he said. Perks also slammed what he described as Metrolinx's lack of transparency. Metrolinx is where public accountability goes to die, he says. Tory, who is considering running again for mayor this fall after his shock 2023 resignation, said in a statement that he couldn't comment on a confidential document he hadn't seen, but he told the Star in an email that he was proud to lead the charge as mayor to get new transit built through agreements with higher levels of government. I find it unfortunate that some inside City Hall want to keep arguing about plans endorsed by voters and their governments, which evolved over time. What we need is more transit and not more politicking and bickering, he wrote. Metrolinx declined to answer questions about why the cost figures hadn't been previously made public, but pushed back against the notion that money spent on the deferred stations had been sunk. Both sites, in quotes, are protected for future delivery of the stations, the agency said. It declined to say whether it is committed to building the stops, and according to a city report, all work on them ceased in the early 2025. The agency asserted that the 3 SmartTrack stations it is building, in quotes, will create new transit connections and help people get to where they need to go faster. A spokesperson for the city said transit projects across Canada have suffered cost increases, but importantly, every aspect of SmartTrack, including the decision to defer 2 stops, has been reviewed and approved by City Council through public reports and debate. Toronto is focused on delivering the other 3 stops while preserving the option to advance the deferred stations should funding on the market conditions allow. Why stations were dropped. The new confidential report, which contains information on SmartTrack shared with the city by the province, provides additional insight about why the 2 stations were put on ice. Building the King Liberty stop near the dense Liberty Village will require complicated track closures and service adjustments that would disrupt one of Metrolinx's busiest rail corridors. When that was factored in, the cost pressures and logistics made this station very difficult and costly to build. By the fall of 2024, the projected cost of King Liberty had risen by more than $230 million to about $590 million, and Finch Kennedy had jumped by roughly $130 million to almost $370 million, the document shows. Citing concerns about the city's spending on the SmartTrack as unfunded TTC repair work mounted. Last November, Councilor Jamal Myers, Scarborough North TTC Chair and ally of Mayor Olivia Chow, moved a council motion requesting a city audit of SmartTrack. The news cost figures were in the confidential attachment to the resulting report. Audit request refused. In her public response, Auditor General Tara Anderson decided to conduct an audit, saying she had no authority to review spending managed by Metrolinx. She noted that normally the city holds its vendors to account through contract agreements, but as a provincial agency of a higher order of government, Metrolinx is not a typical vendor, and the city sometimes has limited visibility into its decisions on SmartTrack. That's despite the fact that, according to the auditor, the agency is in charge of everything from selecting contractors to deciding how to best use and manage city-provided funds. Councilman Jas Meteau, Toronto St. Paul's, is urging Council to order an audit of SmartTrack anyway, writing in a letter to the committee that an investigation was necessary to ensure accountability for how city funds are being spent and to prevent Metrolinx mismanagement. A public update provided to the council in November said there were 3 remaining Smart Track stations are slated to open between 2027 and 2031. As of fall 2025, around $378 million have been spent by the project, with about $165 million coming from the city, according to the confidential document. A spokesperson for Chow said she was intent on containing costs. He said Smart Track represents a decade of lost opportunity to build a new transit and hundreds of millions squandered on the previous mayor's unfulfilled and ill-conceived election promise. And Ben Spur is the Star's City Hall Bureau Chief based in Toronto. You can reach him by email at bspurr@ thestar.ca. This next article is under real estate, and the title is How This Woman Built a Home in Toronto for Less Than $300,000. She didn't want to be Nona in the corner, so she built a garden suite in her and her daughter's Etobicoke backyard. And this article is written by Mae Warren, who's a housing reporter. Inside her little country cottage, Patty Bowen sits on a plush green sofa, a steaming cup of tea on the coffee table. Her favorite books, along with medieval-style tapestries, lines the walls of the home. It's furnished with antiques from her parents' place in Ottawa and Facebook Marketplace finds, an idiosyncratic style she calls Grand Millennial. The devoted grandmother prizes her independence, but she also wants to help her family out with childcare. Luckily, it's about a 30-second walk to them. Her home is literally in her daughter's backyard. I have everything I need, said the retired charity executive. Her daughter, Elizabeth, rushes in and hands off 3-month-old John, wrapped in a colorful patchwork quilt, to Bowen, so she can deal with some water in her basement. I'm very cozy. Bowen built her garden suite from the ground up after co-buying the Etobicoke, and that's Etobicoke lot with her daughter and son-in-law in December of 2024. The couple lives on the main detached home, which, at $1.3 million, they could have not afforded alone. But this is not your grandmother's granny flat. At around 960 square feet, 2 stories, 2 bedrooms, and 2.5 baths, plus a Harry Potter-style cupboard under the stairs for extra storage, her cottage doesn't exactly feel like a tiny home, especially in Toronto, where a condo that size would be considered spacious. And she built it for less than $300,000. Some garden suites, which have been allowed in Toronto without having to get special permission since 2022, may look straight out of the pages of Architectural Digest, with sleek interiors, high-end finishes, and multi-million-dollar price tags. But Bowen's represents a more attainable every woman path, an affordable build that gives a senior like her a way to stay connected to family, and millennials a path to home ownership in a city where the costs have risen far above what most people make. The total for her to co-purchase the land and build the suite came in at under $400,000, as she contributed $100,000 for the family's down payment on the property. She also now pays $2,000 a month towards a mortgage. I'm like a poster child for doing this, Bowen said. I'm not living in a trailer in the backyard or anything. I'm in a real little home. Her dog, Lily, sits quietly beside her, and somewhere her 2 cats, Bridget and Seamus, are hiding. In a cabinet in the living room are urns containing the ashes of beloved pets she's had over the years. Bowen had to toss a lot of stuff when she moved from her home in Brighton, Ontario, near Belleville. But she held on to the urns as well as heirlooms, including her family crest, done by Ralph Carmichael, the same artist who designed the loonie, which she proudly displays in the living room. In the kitchen, is a treasured photo collage of family pictures with a portrait of her mother, who served in the Royal Canadian Air Force during the Second World War, at the center. Her daughter and son-in-law, both first responders, worked shifts, so they knew they would need help with childcare when they found out they were expecting almost 3 years ago. The family sat down and figured out there were about 9 days a month when both mom and dad would be working around the clock. But with typical daycares closing around 6 p.m., they had to get creative. So they hatched a plan. Bowen used the equity from the sale of her Brighton home to help with a down payment on the roughly 35 by 110-foot lot. The 68-year-old describes herself as a planner. She spent her life designing programs, implementing them, and sticking to a budget. So when it came to retirement, she wanted to be in control. She set a budget of $200,000 and got to work. Bowen had to get building permits from the city and designed the home herself, with a building inspector coming every step of the way. While the suite was under construction, she lived in the spare bedroom in the main house, which gave her a look into a life she didn't want. "I don't want to be Nona in the corner," she said. There were a few surprises, like having to put in bike parking that was required by the city, something she said she doesn't really make sense for her home. Bowen saved by getting items like bathroom vanities from Facebook Marketplace and putting a cheerful garden wallpaper panel up behind the kitchen sink instead of a backsplash. She detailed the budget in a post on Facebook. $12,000 for lumber, $13,000 for the electrical, and $8,000 for interior plumbing, $7,000 for the roof, for example. Some things took longer than expected or cost more. And she had a falling out with someone she'd hired. In the end, the build took about 8 months, with the total price tag coming in around $280,000. Still, she never had found a home in the neighborhood for that. "I feel like I took on this project and it hit some really bumpy bits, but the project is done and I'm set," she said. With her own home, she can retreat when she wants to without anyone bothering her for having another cookie. Her biggest advice is to build a cupboard under the stairs like she did. It's where she stores all the spillover stuff, like a second set of dishes and casseroles. And one day she envisions her grandkids playing there. You have to be very clever with your space. Toronto City Council changed bylaws to make it easier to build laneway suites in 2018 in Old Toronto and East York, and across the city in 2019. Garden suites followed in 2022. Since 2018, there have been 1,533 permits issued for laneway and garden suites as of November 2025. The most issued were in the ward at Davenport, 272, followed by University Rosedale, 178, and the least in Don Bailey North, 7. In Bowen's ward of Etobicoke Lakeshore, there have been 81 permits issued. Laneway suites can sometimes make a property take longer to sell because some owners don't want the responsibility of finding and managing tenants. But both laneway suites and garden suites can generate rental income and provide housing options. Noam Hazen, principal of Noam Hazen Design Studio, who has worked on many secondary suites, said they sometimes go for higher rents because they feel more like a home and less like an apartment. Citizen developers, such as Bowen, are becoming more common, especially when there's a family connection, he said. Bowen doesn't have a pension, but got a small one from her husband who died in the summer. She's, in quotes, not a rich person, she said, but because she has no debt and manageable living expense, she has enough. With her project finally finished, Bowen can see a little creek and weeping willow trees from her window. She's a 5-minute walk to the lake and across from a playground where she can take her grandchildren. "I'm so blessed," she said. And correction, February 21st, 2026. This article was updated to reflect the correct number of permits in University Rosedale and the correct ward with the most permits. And May Warren is a Toronto-based housing reporter for The Star. You have been listening to a reading of articles and features from the February 23rd, 2026 issue of the Toronto Star. Your reader has been Judy, and it has been an honor and pleasure to read for you. Take great care of yourselves and have a most amazing day, and thank you for listening.